Hello, welcome to Lunchtime BABLing. My name is Shea Brown. I'm the CEO of BABL AI, a company that audits algorithms for bias, ethical risk, and good governance. I am excited to be joined by Khoa, who is, some of you might have seen him lurking in the background in some of the webinars, but Khoa is a member of BABL AI. He's one of our lead technical part of the lead technical team. I mean, pretty much Khoa is the lead technologist for us. And I asked Khoa to join us today because I think a lot of people have been asking about what we do and the kind of work that we do and how to get into the field, those sorts of questions. And I think Khoa has really, I mean, an interesting perspective on this because I mean, he's really in the thick of things now, leading our technical bias audits for, I guess, how long has it been now, Khoa?
For
I feel like over at least a year and a half or something, if not more.
for more than a year, definitely.
Yeah. And so I asked him to join us to just talk a little bit about his experience, and he also do some really interesting stuff on AI incidences. So thank you, Khoa, for joining us at the last minute. So I appreciate it. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, which I think people are interested, because everybody's wondering, how do you get into this field? Because the field is so kind of new. And what's your story? Like, where did this start? Where did this interest start? And so wherever that story starts, I'd be curious to hear where this journey began for you.
Sure. So, well, I actually my academic background is actually in environmental chemistry, which is completely different from AI and all that. But like having that background, one of the things that I was I guess moving into was like data science. I was interested in data science for like quite some time. And while I was in sort of the field of data science and doing the work there, I got fortunately sort of exposed to some of the more um uh some of the more sort of like interesting things about data when it comes to sort of governance of data and how to use data responsibly and ethically. Because the startup that I was working at the time was sort of trying to operationalize a lot of the the governance aspects around data. And so I fortunately got to sort of get to experience that a little bit. And so from there, I was doing a lot more sort of like networking and socialization around, I guess like responsible AI communities and ethical AI communities. And so like I joined a couple of organizations like the Montreal AI Ethics Institute and ForHumanity. And from there, just sort of like getting to know people from that space, and taking courses, of course, that's a very big part of what I did in the space, and that's how I got started from there.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So I met Khoa when I'm a fellow at ForHumanity, and this is at a time ForHumanity had started to grow a lot. I think now it's some crazy number, like over 1,400 people or something are volunteering and working on different projects at ForHumanity. And this was sometime last year or the beginning of the year before, or the end of the year before. I had offered a course called Finding Your Place in AI Ethics Consulting. And that's where I kind of first really interacted with Khoa, because in that course, and so if any of you know about that course, or maybe even some of you have taken that course, there's a project at the end, which is there's like a self-assessment where you talk about what your goals are, what you want to do, but then there's a risk assessment. And so as one of the projects is like a really short kind of, I don't know if I call it risk assessment light, but it's sort of like a light risk assessment where you pick an algorithmic system socio-technical system, or it can be really narrow algorithmic, and you do a risk assessment. Now, the course is not about risk assessment, it's about getting into the industry, but I think this is identifying risk is one of the most important aspects of this entire thing. And in comes this risk assessment, which was amazing, and it was quaz. And then for the self-assessment afterwards, Khoa talked about being interested in the field. And so it wasn't long after that I said, I want this person on my team. And luckily you were available and were willing, and I was super excited about you joining our team. And so, yeah, that was interesting. And then, I mean, of course, since then I think I talked to you almost every day, working on the many projects that were and initiatives that we're pushing through. So tell me a little bit about, so I think one thing that people are curious about is like, how did you learn about the field? Because by the time you came to me, you'd already clearly had a pretty good grasp of what was going on, what the major issues in the field were, and not the technical stuff. I mean, the technical stuff you're clearly very good at. But the thing that excited me about you was your grasp on the relevant issues and being able to hone in on that quickly. How did you get that?
I actually, well, I talked to quite a few people. Like in ForHumanity, in Montreal AI Ethics Institute, but also, I was doing a lot of, reaching out to different people on LinkedIn. I was sort of, yeah, like, so, if there are people that sort of, active in the field of some sort, I try to connect with them and then like just reach out and ask them about, what they think about the field, what they're thinking the pain points are in the field, and what are the relevant issues. I learned some of that from there. Those conversations were very helpful. And I got to talk to different people, from academics to sort of like people who are in the industry. And then some like AI practitioners. But then this was like 2 years ago, which is in some ways like ancient history, right? In terms of responsible AI timeline. So like and all of those issues that we're in some ways dealing with right now are also just variations of those issues that happened before. So like just getting to know people from the space and what they're working on, and what are the things that that they're dealing with on a daily basis. That's how I know get to know the field more. Yeah.
Yeah. So talking to people, reaching out to people that you are doing what you kind of were interested in doing at that time. And did you feel people were pretty helpful? Like you said, there was helpful conversations, but were people willing to talk? I mean, how many people do you have to reach out to before someone decides to talk?
Well, the thing is that like, if they don't want to talk, they're not going to reply to you on LinkedIn anyways, right? So if there are people that doing cool things, and because I just sort of like intro as sort of like, I'm interested in the space. It sounds, what you're doing is really cool. Would you be able to, maybe have a chat for like 30 minutes? And some of them are very very, very willing to. I also, just like connect with people after I met them, like, in one of the Montreal AI ethics sort of like study groups, or, or in sort of like a work sessions, in ForHumanity, and I just, reach out, because we have this sort of, commonality of just being in that group. And I follow up and was like, hey, you see, this is the very cool things that you did, and usually that gets a lot of traction. So
Yeah. I mean, it's great. I think that this is, I mean, I'm seeing more and more people doing this, reaching out. I get quite a few people asking about the field myself, and unfortunately, like, my time has become more limited, and so I've had less time. But early on, especially, I was really tried to encourage that, because I think we need more people in the field, and it's getting bigger, which is exciting to me, because I think even a few years ago there was not that many jobs explicitly in this. There might be some data protection jobs or privacy jobs, and the occasional, like, if somebody hired an AI ethics officer, that was like a huge deal.
Yeah.
And it, I remember when Salesforce first hired their, I think it was humane use or something, Office of Humane Use of AI, or I can't remember exactly what the term is. I remember that was a huge deal when they kind of had this whole department to do it. But now it seems like even small to medium-sized enterprises are hiring people in this space, and and that's exciting. There's opportunity out there, and so that's great. So I want to ask you now a little bit about sort of your other job. We'll go back to BABL in a minute, but you also work somewhere else that sort of by default keeps you pretty up to date with what's going on with these AI AI incidents. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my other job is being an editor at the AI incident database. And so it's a database that documents a lot of the incidents and harms of AI, like real world harms of AI. And so my job there, in a lot of times is just um, well, it's a lot of reading the news. It's a lot of keeping up to date with what's going on, um, and also getting to do a little bit of like the investigative part, which which is very very useful. I mean, it's very crucial for sort of just the database aspect of what the data quality aspect of the database, but also digging into sort of like the times and the when the incident happens and who was it developed by, who are the deployers, who are the harm parties. Like these things are very crucial. And also obviously it helps a lot with being a practitioner in the field, because you get to not only like learn about like the the incidents, but also you start sort of like getting a lot of the skills that have to do with like AI risk. Immediately you can learn about like the various different risks and how it actually manifests in the real world of AI. And so that's very that's very invaluable experience, I would say.
Yeah, I think just being able to recognize the risk. I mean, that's what I talked about in the finding your place in AI ethics, is that there's the primary thing that you're doing is identifying where things could go wrong or where things have the potential to go wrong.
Yep.
And of course, figuring out what's causing that. But just knowing the landscape of what has happened already is a really crucial part. And I remember early on, when I was first starting BABL, and we were coming up with a framework for risk assessment, I had a bookmark, which is sort of outdated now. I stopped keeping up with it, but I had a folder of bookmarks that were anything that happened that had to do with AI and some potential negative incident or something that like was a development which I thought could potentially be problematic. I would bookmark that and dig deep, and it was really valuable to do that kind of work. But now, of course, you can't open a website, a news website, without having at least 3 AI related news articles, which blows my mind. I mean, I think a lot of people are just now realizing, there's a whole bunch of people who are getting into AI or waking up to the fact that AI is everywhere very, very recently. But those of us who've been paying attention for a while, it's a strange feeling to have all of a sudden every single place you look, it seems like there's this AI related, and ChatGPT and DALL-E and those sort of generative AI is clearly the culprits here. And I'm actually curious, I wasn't planning on asking you about this, but I do want to hear your thoughts. Like, what are, we're all so overexposed with these large language models and people talking about them. But I mean, that's what we do for a job, is to try to identify and mitigate risks related to these things. What are your thoughts on these large language models, like in terms of your thoughts in general, but as they relate to risk and sort of the future? Because I have a feeling our business is going to be shifting over to looking at a lot of the time. And so what are your
Right.
thoughts on how this is going to unfold?
Well, I mean, ChatGPT and these large language models are, like I guess since the release of ChatGPT, right? Like now it seems like everyone is doing their own sort of like either ChatGPT version or like incorporate in some way ChatGPT into whatever they're doing, right? Uh, I can tell you, from the incident side of things, um, it ranges from ChatGPT doing something harmful, or like there's outputs that are harmful, or it's been incorporated into something else, and then that's something else, um because it relies so much on ChatGPT, it obviously inherits a lot of the risk that ChatGPT has. And so, a lot of times, like the application from, the original large language model affects, all the systems, downstreams, I guess, right? And so, it feels, um, honestly, it feels very overwhelming at times, that like, the harms of these systems are keep propagating all the time. But at the same time, that's uh, which is why, like, I find that like the work that we're doing with like risk assessment and auditing, makes a lot of sense, because in some ways we are moving the needle quite a bit, right? With respect to, keep introducing controls, right? Whether it be external controls or internal controls, introducing controls to these systems, and, hopefully making them a little bit less harmful.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's the hope. That's the mission. So I want to say, like, if people have if questions, please put them in the Q&A. We've got Khoa here, and Khoa's um, you know, been on the ground with us doing this sort of work. And so if you want to ask him or myself any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A. So one thing with that I think is interesting about the large language models and the proliferation of it is that it changes the game a little bit in terms of technical testing. Because if you think about pre-large language, like natural language processing has always been difficult to test. And I mean, the reasons are obvious. The parameter space of outputs is infinite, basically, or
Right.
as close to infinite as you can get, or practically infinite. And the use cases are varied and many. Unlike some systems like classical sort of classifiers, or
Right.
decision augmentation systems, or computer vision systems, where technical testing you have a roadmap, or at least we do, because we've done it quite a bit. We have a roadmap for how we approach that. Now we're in this regime where the AI, primary AI that's getting inserted into all these products, has this infinite scope, and it's in terms of the parameter space of outputs and potential bad things it could say is huge. And so what that means is that we're falling back in this onto what was our bread and butter for sure, which is this sort of classical socio-technical risk assessment becomes very necessary, because you have to first identify those harms or potential ways it could go wrong, kind of theoretically, and really connect it to how people get hurt. And then that would inform kind of a narrow version of the technical testing, because you can't test for everything. And so that's exciting to me, this possibility. But I want to ask you a little bit about, so for those who don't know, and probably most of you don't know, Khoa is the sort of main architect of our process audit. And so the process audit is basically like a criterion-based audit. So those who are familiar with ForHumanity know that that's sort of the style of audit that ForHumanity generates, which is you have sort of binary criteria that has normative statements for, like, you shall do this, you shall do that, and then you have to prove that you've done that. And then so there's the sort of binary outputs. And what I want to get your thoughts on are about that process. Like, because that's a real skill, and you have to bring in a lot of different pieces in order to really figure out, is this going to be effective? What are the most important things to require? So could
Mm.
you just talk through a little bit about like the process of going through that? Like, let's say there's a given sort of law, or there's a given risk that you want to mitigate, and you want to come up with some sort of process
Mm.
audit for doing that. What's
Yeah.
your take on it? What's your process? How do you approach that?
Um, yeah. So, well, the way that I approach sort of like, making the process like audit in some ways is about, well, just, first it's just about, getting really sort of like the core of that law, of that regulation, and understanding what's it all about. And then also then doing a much sort of like broader, research of, of the relevant things about things around that law, including, other pieces of legislation that is, relevant to that one, or, context to that one, understanding, perspective from the academic communities about the, I guess, like the risk or the harms that like that law is trying to mitigate, understanding the industry perspective about that piece of legislation, as well as like what have they done in terms of like uh risk mitigation for that, for example, right? And so there's a lot of like research components that have to that I think like one needs to know before like doing anything with sort of like development work for that. And then well, with the audit, uh you draft, right? Yeah, I mean it's an iterative process of constructing criteria and requirements for an audit, and then absolutely the important part is to have to test it, to have to go through different uh steps to make sure that like it's operationalizable, right? It's it is something that is either that people might be familiar with, or if it's something that people are not familiar with, it's a little bit it is challenging, but it's not impossible to achieve, right?
Yeah.
And so I mean you remember the time that we were going through all the test cases, of like how do we, even just sort of like, the requirements we have for risk assessment, right? Understanding, okay, let's, this criteria says this, these are the sub criteria. How do we, can we use this framework to really assess, let's say, someone's risk assessment, right? And then seeing like how it's how it works, in real life, right?
Yeah.
And doing that a number of times to make sure that it's good enough, and then that's just sort of like the, I guess, like the theoretical lab testing case, right? And then once we put that out, like it needs to have like a live testing component, and we've done quite a few times of that already, right? So
Yeah.
just I mean it's an arduous process for I mean just for quality reasons. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is been a learning experience for us going through this process. And I think in a lot of ways, it's helped our whole team to be better at what they do, having to really think through and in some sense have to, distill things down into really, really bite-sized pieces and think about how it actually gets done. So speaking of this, so we're now in the process, of course, of developing training for our own team. Given that we've gone through this process, we're likely going to have to, onboard new auditors, in the coming months and for sure years. We're going to have to build the team up, and so we're developing internal training, which we're now offering externally.
Mhm.
And so, like, in your opinion, I mean, because I mean, you're part of this process, thinking through it. Like, what are your thoughts on what are the key features that are going to make a good auditor? Like seeing what has happened, what you need on the ground.
Mhm.
What's the kind of basics for you that you kind of are looking for when you're thinking about can this person help?
Right. Um, well, I mean, I think from what I've done, from the experience of just like auditing stuff, I mean, I mean, having a strong foundation, whatever that may be in the relevant, sections of the audit, is very key. Because because you never know what's going to be thrown at you, and you need that sort of like strong foundation to understand, like to then use that expertise to then evaluate whether or not someone has met certain requirements of the audits, right? Like, and that foundation can be, I mean, we're doing the technical testing, right? Like what the technical portion of the audit. So, an obvious one is, you need a strong technical foundation. And that can mean, that probably, in some cases means that you have to understand how ML works. You have to understand, sometimes you have to make very educated guesses about how a system might work, or, I mean, of course, you can always ask, the clients and auditors to help you with that. But, in some sense, there's a lot of things that you have to, make educated guesses about, and then also understanding the nuances and the limits of some of the things that are that understanding the nuances and limits of the decisions that they make. For in our case, because it's technical, even though it's like a technical testing bit, there's a lot of decision making that like people have to do before getting to certain results. And so if you're an auditor, you need to know what are the risks, right? We're talking about like risk assessment and all that kind of stuff, right? You need to know about what are the risks and what are the limits of the things that they're trying to do. And sometimes, right, like we learned this, which is, that developers don't even know about these sort of risks themselves. And so, it's part of our job to understand, that, socio-technical landscape, in a way. And that's not, right. And that might not be included in sort of like the technical training that a lot of people have had, but this is absolutely needed also to be to be an auditor.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So.
And so to help people who are listening
Mhm.
understand this process a little bit more, do you mind walking us through kind of what our process is? Because you're talking about technical evaluation,
Right.
and then there are different sections of audit that we might have in different categories, and different people might handle that. So could you kind of walk through I mean, you could use the New York City because that's the most apropos right now as an example, but just talk through how that process actually works. Even from the client side, like what does it mean to actually get audited by us through this type of audit?
Like the process of the audit, I could say.
Yeah, and then but focus a little bit on the internal team too. Like, what does our
Mhm.
team look like in terms of who's responsible for what?
Right, 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 right. Okay, so I mean, yeah, the audit wise, uh, I mean, even before like what we call like the audit, right? Like, we have like a sort of sessions that like auditors, for example, need to understand about, the algorithms. And so we schedule with the auditee or the client, a session to go over, and to really understanding what their algorithm is about. And this means, the technical aspects, the socio-technical aspects, context, use, purpose, all that stuff. The data that they use, how it was trained, how it operates, the context that it operates in, all that stuff. I mentioned the data. In this very particular case for like the New York City law, we dig quite a bit into the data that they use to get the impact ratios, for example, right? And then, also like any other stuff that they've done in terms of like, governance, like, do they have some governance structure to oversee this, algorithm, right? Have they done a risk assessment? Have they done any bias testing? Have they done any bias mitigation? If they, are they, do they use any, do they have any like ethical principles? Do they have like documentations for these sort of things? It's a very, comprehensive approach into understanding the algorithm. And the reason why we do this is because the auditors need to know all of these things, and these gonna be like on the back of their mind when they see the evidence or the documentations that the auditee submitted, right? And so for example, right, if I see impact ratios or like numbers, those don't mean anything to me unless I know where that numbers comes from, unless I know how, the algorithm might have produced that number, right? Those are the things, that the key things really that like needs to be known. And then afterwards, right, like after that session, then like each person who assigns sort of like different sections, we we do like a first sort of like look at the at the evidence. Well, I guess like before that, obviously the auditees have to submit documentation to us for review in terms of satisfying the criteria of the audit. And then each of us, with our sections, we go over the audit criteria, we evaluate whether or not it's it would satisfy that based
What are
on what
the
they've given us.
what are the current sections now for like New York, for instance?
Right. So like the general section. So
Yeah.
yeah, the general sections are, so there's one that is disparate impact quantification. This is sort of like the technical core of this audit in particular. It relates directly to what the law requires, right, in terms of like impact ratios. And what we've done here mostly in terms of the criteria is to really lay out all the steps that an auditee must have taken to then arrive at these numbers. And so what that means for us as auditors is to go through that process and understand what they have done to arrive at that at the numbers. So checking things like have they defined the AEDT correctly, that is that has this sort of like narrative about how it's used in practice and in hiring or in employment, or whatever the case may be, right? Do they have, is their use of the data set that they have to then test for disparate impact, is that appropriate? Do they have justification for it? Is that justification appropriate? All that stuff. And then also checking the most important part, I think of that section is about understanding the basis for the metric that they use for disparate impact. So understanding things like what's the positive outcome, what's the negative outcome, if they use like selection rate, for example, right? Like because if let's say a person, I guess depending on how they define certain parts, how they define what is favorable and what is disfavorable, then then when you get to the selection rate and the impact ratios, you understand sort of the context of the of that number.
Yeah.
Right, because without that, you can have someone defining, let's say, the positive outcome as moving, let's say, being hired or like being interviewed as sort of like a positive outcome, versus sort of like being in a short list of I guess like candidates that is viewed by recruiters. Those two can be positive outcomes, right? But they have very different implications, and obviously the numbers for impact ratios are going to be very different. So we need to understand all of that. Anyway,
Yeah.
so so I think like yeah, and the rest of it honestly is just about checking sort of like the numbers and making sure that those things make sense. We also have criteria for like checking the statistical significance and errors, of course, right? Because in some ways we believe, right, that auditees and the clients need to understand these sort of things, the error bars, right? Because not wanting to harp on my like data science people here, but a lot of times like data scientists are not really trained in error computation, and so that's a very key thing about these sort of systems, is that you have a lot of you have to account for errors when you have them. So to understand, to contextualize the number that you have, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So
yeah.
so we have disparate impact quantification, which is the more technical side.
Hmm.
We also have requirements around risk assessment and governance. And
Yeah.
so we have different auditors doing different parts,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
So yeah, I think one thing that, because a lot of people ask, about what kind of technical knowledge do I need to have? And
Yep.
I think there is a baseline, and I'll ask you to reflect on this if you have thoughts. Like there's a baseline technical knowledge you need to have, in the sense that you have to understand the language and some amount of risk. But if you are risk associated with particular systems, let's say,
Hmm.
and know what the difference between a classification system versus a regression, or reinforcement learning versus whatever computer vision. I mean, you need to know the
Sure.
language.
Yeah.
But there are auditors that work on our team that don't have high technical, like they couldn't code things, for instance,
Hmm.
because we have these other sections which are much more socio-technical, like governance controls, risk assessments, and how to do risk assessments right.
Yeah.
So I think reflecting on the training that we're doing, for which is sort
Hmm.
of like the basic training or the boot camp for auditors, is to get everybody up to a certain level, but then there's specializations within that. And some people will be specialized, like we have Ben, who's a PhD in ethics from Oxford.
Yeah.
He's working on the risk assessment bit, and because he's done risk
Hmm.
assessments before in large companies, he knows what it looks like and that kind of thing. But then
Right.
there are other aspects that he wouldn't work on. He would just support you,
Yeah.
for instance, in your technical assessment.
Hmm.
So there's place for non-technical people even in this in this auditing environment. Is that right?
Yep. I mean, yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, they have to understand their foundation as well, right? Like, Ben has, very strong like ethics and foundation as well, right? And so, in understanding, the risk assessment and what risk the auditee has identified, right? They are then able to evaluate whether or not the risks are appropriate or proportional to the system that the auditees have, right? And I mean, yeah, you have to have like a quite a strong foundation there to understand the part.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. I mean, because I think there's a lot of angst about people coming into this field worried about their technical level, and I think that
Uh,
there's a sweet spot, and there's like a minimum technical understanding that you have to have.
right.
But
Hmm.
within that, or after you've passed that bar,
Hmm.
then there is a whole bunch of different specializations that people can have
Yep.
and still be effective auditors. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think that's good. So if there are questions, by the way, people who are attending or have questions and want to ask us anything, feel free. As always, this is very free form and relaxed. And so, make use of this time if you want to ask us some questions about anything. So I'm curious to get your thoughts, Khoa, on where we're going to go from here. And when I say we, I don't mean BABL per se, but kind of BABL's in the mix here. But we have so many local laws in the United States that are coming up, many of which are either require auditing or are going to require some sort of assurance, or at the very least, um, people to do internal risk assessments that many companies are not prepared to do.
Yep.
Then we have the Digital Services Act
Yep.
in the EU, and the AI Act in the EU.
Hmm.
And on the federal level, there's a lot of interest in I mean, I just attended a really interesting, I'm not even sure if I told you about this, Khoa, but a really interesting talk at the Department of, not a talk, it was a workshop that was joint basically between NIST, the Department of Labor, EEOC was there, this organization, PETE, which works under the Department of Labor for disabilities and auditing for disabilities.
Yep.
And it was a really great conversation. I can't talk really about exactly what was said there, but we were basically organizing our thinking on how we deal with some of these issues. And so a lot is happening now in this field.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on exactly what's going to happen to this industry? I just broadly want to get your thoughts, like, because I don't think anybody knows for sure. All we know is that there's a huge amount of activity, including the chat GPT kind of craze and the large language models. And so clearly
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot going on, but it's anybody's guess exactly how it's going to play out. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, on the auditing bit, I just well, I don't know what's gonna happen, but what I'm hoping is that, there's gonna be some more standardization efforts around, editing and, formalization. Well, formalization rather than standardization, but formalization. Um, you know, uh, yeah, because it seems like, auditing is sort of proposed as like, very um in a lot of like regulations, as you said, right? But I think there needs to be more sort of I guess like looking out for auditors more, because I mean, you've seen this from the field, right? Like it's, without these sort of like, formalizations and efforts like that, it seems like, it can, audits can range from like anything. And yeah, and I don't know how, well, we don't know yet, I guess, like we don't know yet like how effective, like, all of these sort of like disparate efforts of auditing are, right? And how effective are they at, achieving sort of like the goals of these regulations. Um,
Yeah.
so, I guess like one of the things that I'm just hoping is that, we get a little bit more attention from regulations, in a, in how, audits should be and how it can move forward. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I think I agree. If I was to say what I wish for, it would be that the field comes together and gets a little bit more cohesive. Because in theory, we shouldn't be the ones that come up with these
yeah,
criteria, right? That's not that's not the ideal scenario. It's just
absolutely.
the market kind of forced us to do this.
Sure.
And we work with ForHumanity, which is a really amazing organization. And I think organizations like ForHumanity need support from regulators,
Absolutely.
from governments, that sort of the civil society, the real unbiased civil society,
Hmm.
and then of course there's the academic community, which is very active in this
Yep.
area. A lot of people talking about audits in the academic community, and we need to get all of those groups together
Hmm.
to really coalesce on, what is it we mean when we say algorithm audit.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be, everybody doesn't have to agree, but there does need to be some kind of baseline, or at least some standards that cut across
Hmm.
uh, jurisdictions and industry, different industries, because there are going to be many industries that have to get audited.
Yeah.
And I don't think it will be, I don't think it will be siloed in the way that medical AI is going to be audited differently than hiring AI. I think that there will be standards that cut across all of those,
Hmm.
which is exciting for people who enjoy working in a different, like, I enjoy the fact that we in our work have worked with ed tech companies and autonomous vehicle companies and higher tech companies and
Yeah.
medical companies. Like, that's exciting to me.
Yep.
um,
Absolutely.
and I hope that the field stays that way, so that we have this ability for auditors to uh, sort of dip their toes in lots of different fields. That's a
Hmm.
selfish thing from on my part, because I think that's part of what's so interesting about this field. But that needs to be decided by society, and I'm hoping that it comes.
Yep.
What do you think So in some sense, almost every product now is going to have an AI in it, given that everybody is incorporating these large language models. And so
Yeah.
do you think that every product needs to be audited, or do you think there are some subsets that just we don't need to worry about?
Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I guess part of that question is about like who's accountable, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, but at the same time, it's like, like, cause, one can say that like, okay, for like, like, let's say ChatGPT, like OpenAI, obviously is accountable, and they should, and I definitely think that they should do a lot more. But at the same time, it's like, a lot, these large language model, like, these so-called sort of like general purpose models, right? They, which I hate the term, right? But they are used as proxies for various different applications, and very well, they're used as sort of like human workers, right? Um, so yeah, like and they're acting as if like these sort of like models are uh like I guess like nearly perfect in some ways, and it's yeah, I don't know. I don't know either whether or not auditing is sort of the approach to those people who use ChatGPT as part of the business. Maybe. Um
Yeah.
or maybe there has to be like a different approach. Yeah, that's it.
Internal controls, or something
Yeah,
that has more to do with yeah, and a lot of regulations are moving in that direction. I think it is good. I think there's still going to be a lot of work for people like us who set those up before, for people or people who understand, because it's not typical risk mitigation. Like there are a lot of risk people
right.
in big companies who are very good at that, at risk mitigation. But the risks associated with AI are very unique. And eventually people who are like an internal audit or risk functions or compliance functions in big companies, eventually that will be part of their repertoire, that they will understand at least how to engage with those. But in the near term, that's a really specialized skill, doing that, um, to identify the unique risk that has to do with, I'm plugging in
Yeah,
this predictive thing into my workflow. What is that going to do?
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, right? Like I think yeah, and in some ways, to understand that risk, like you have to understand how how the thing works. Sometimes like that's really what what you need to understand um to really get to really get at what's it what's it good at and what it's bad at, right? Like, and it's you know I mean it's hard to really discern, even for us, right? Like to really understand, like how these things are, like these sort of like general purpose systems are, uh we have data about like what it's bad at, but it's like it's not really comprehensive, right? Like these are sort of like more like disparate approach to sort of like seeing like how these things can fail, but there's not really like an overarching sort of like framework of like understanding how these things can work, because it's so as you say, like it's in some ways practically infinite, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, regarding the general purpose, quote unquote, general purpose algorithms, I feel like there has to be some requirements. Like if the EU is currently considering putting them into high risk category.
Hmm.
I think that maybe it's debatable whether that's the case. I think for sure one thing that needs to happen is that there needs to be transparency requirements, because we've run into, in our practice, several times, we won't name any names, but we've run in several times with companies that are using algorithms that are general purpose from some API or some other big,
Right.
household name companies create these algorithms, and
Hmm.
then they don't give any information that's relevant, risk relevant information to the people who are plugging those into their system.
Yeah,
And so when we
absolutely.
come in to either audit or to do a risk assessment or to do bias testing or something, where it's a huge barrier for the
Hmm.
companies, it's a huge risk for the companies to not get that information. And I think in some sense, the companies that make these general purpose algorithms are behemoths, and they have a huge amount of resources and funding, and they're not giving the right kind of information that's needed. And so if I had my druthers as to what I would recommend to the European Commission or the European Parliament on what they need to put in terms of requirements, it would be force transparency. If you're going to do nothing else, force them to hand over how you've tested it, how it actually works. I mean, most of these things can be given in a way that doesn't really violate intellectual property, right?
Yeah.
It's a neural network. You can tell us what kind of neural network it is. You can't reproduce that if you tell us what kind of neural network it is or where you got the data. That's not, nowadays, compute is the biggest barrier. It's expensive to do all of this. So it's not like you're giving away too much. I'm ranting now, but anyway, I think that's a serious worry. So let me ask one more time before I let Khoa get to sleep, because it's pretty late there, right? What time is it?
Yeah, it's almost 11 p.m.
Almost 11 p.m. So before I let Khoa actually get back to a reasonable bedtime, if there are any questions for us, please throw them in the Q&A, and we can sort of do a rapid fire round at the end if there are any. So I'm super excited and nervous about this training that we're offering. I think that there was a lot of internal debate. You weighed in, a lot of the other team members weighed in about this training, and we all kind of were nervous about offering this. What are your thoughts now? Like, what are you? Is it okay that we're doing this? That we're going to be offering this kind of internal training out to essentially give certificates to other people for auditing, or at least having this training? Are we doing the right thing?
I think so. I think it can help a lot with I think it can help the ecosystem quite a bit. Because I think like one of the things that we that can come out of this is some very specific training that is culmination of what we've experienced right in the field and in the auditing world, and and that's yeah, I think that's quite unique in a sense, right? And yeah, and I think it's very helpful training for people who are interested in auditing for sure, and getting a certificate for that.
Do you think it's useful for people who, like, let's say there aren't any more regulations that require auditing, and but there's this need internally for things. Do you think the kind of stuff that we're trained, like, I have an opinion on this, I want to hear what you think. Do you think, is this useful for those kind of people that are working in companies?
Oh, I absolutely think so. Yeah. Internal. I think like you can get a lot for just internal control stuff for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're seeing gaps even with the people that we, not everybody. I mean, we have a wide variety of people that we audit and work with, some of which are amazing, others that are early on the learning curve. But what we're seeing is we would ideally like to have, we can't really have our auditees taking our training, but ideally we want more people that can understand this stuff internally, because it makes a huge difference if they understand risk, they understand the controls and best practices, understand that kind of stuff internally. It would make a huge difference in those companies, I feel like, to have that. So the hope is that it's useful for people. So we do have some questions, and let me take a look here. So we got to thank you, Khoa, to you for sharing your insights on AI auditing here, and for your continued work on the AI incidents database. So that's very nice. So thank you, Khoa. Somebody else saying that they really are enjoying the training courses, and thanks for offering them, and then thanks to Khoa for showing up. So awesome. So thank you all for showing up. We really appreciate it. I know that these webinars are very turned into quasi rambling podcasts. So I appreciate people who actually come by and listen to us. And thank you so much, Khoa, for showing up on late notice and like offering some of your experience, because I think it's a valuable thing for people to hear from those who are doing this kind of work and what that experience is like. And your journey is really, I mean, to going from environmental chemistry to where you are now, which is, I think you're doing some of the cutting edge stuff in this field. That was a rapid journey, and a lot of it had to do with your work ethic and the dedication that you've put to learning this stuff. So I appreciate it, and I think other people can learn from that story too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. So if you're listening to this on a podcast, thank you for listening. If you're on YouTube, if you could like and subscribe, that would be awesome. And we'll see you next week on Lunchtime BABLing.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.